Have you ever heard the argument that taxation is theft? It's very often given by like libertarian types. This is a really difficult fallacy to notice, but once you start noticing it, you're going to see it everywhere in political conversations, but it's going to take several minutes of me explaining a lot of things that don't really seem to have to do with taxation being theft at all. 2,000 years ago, a dude named Aristotle said that categories in language are really important and we should probably try to understand them a little bit better. So he came up with a couple rules about how categories work. The first is that there are only true or false statements. It's called the law of excluded middles. He also said that every category has a sufficient and necessary condition. So it can either be a part of that category or not a part of that category. So an example that's often cited is the category bachelor. If you are a human, male, adult, not married, you are a bachelor. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And those are all necessary components. So if you're not human, you're not a bachelor. And if you're not male, you're not a bachelor. And if you were married, you're not a bachelor. And for 2,000 years, people just said, okay, yep, that's how categories function. And we didn't think about it until some really cool philosophers came around. This guy mostly, but a bunch of other people too. And they were like, I think categories are a little bit more complicated than you're making them. Because like, what about the Pope? Because the Pope is human, male, adult, not married. No one would ever call him a bachelor. So what's going on there? And the answer is something called prototype theory. Essentially, it's a new, completely groundbreaking idea of how categories function. And it's that we have a normal or prototypical or central member of a category. And the way categories function is you just say things like that. For example, the prototype of the bachelor is a guy in his 20s who dates around a lot. And the Pope is nothing like that guy. So we would never call him a bachelor because it doesn't make any sense. We're trying to communicate, you're like that person who dates around a lot. And this is how a lot of communication happens. Like if Joe's married and I call Joe a little bit of a bachelor, what I'm explaining is that I think he's looking around for women to date a little bit. I was able to communicate information about him even though he doesn't meet the requirements of being a bachelor. Because categories aren't binaries. They exist more as like a gradient. If people are arguing if darts is a type of sport, it kind of is and it kind of isn't. I mean, it's a lot less like football than soccer is, but it's also clearly more of a sport than like reading a book is. So the argument of whether or not darts is a sport is often very pedantic and doesn't get to the root of what we're actually talking about. And here's where that fallacy comes in. So people will often use the argument that something is a member of a category because it meets a certain criteria of necessary and sufficient conditions, even though it is nothing like the prototypical example of that category. Have you ever heard this argument? You're trying to name a street after MLK? He's a criminal. Now, obviously, MLK knowingly, deliberately, and verifiably broke a number of different crimes. But, and this is critical, the arguer is often trying to place the idea that the prototypical example of a criminal should not be giving a statue, which is something that we all agree on. A bank robber who shot a police officer on his way out should not get a statue, and that's the prototypical example. That's what pops into our head when we hear the word criminal. And the argument, whether or not they think they're actually doing this, is really, you should be treating MLK like the prototypical criminal because he is one. Taxation is theft is another good example. Theft's prototypical example is someone breaking into your house and stealing your TV. Now that should not be lawful. And so the argument is really, why are we making taxation lawful? Theft should obviously be unlawful. But what they're doing is so sneaky because taxation should not be treated like other forms of theft because it's so unlike other forms of theft. If you guys can think of any other similar arguments that you've seen that use this type of structure or fallacy or argument, I would love to hear it. I think these are so interesting.